is something that exists across the federal government. I'm really going to focus and hone in on the NSF, which is where I work. I think the point here is to distinguish this from other agencies, and I'm happy to talk more broadly about SBIR. But again, the pitch here is really, we're a little bit unusual in some ways, and so I'm really trying to hit what NSF is looking for and how we think. So hopefully that's not too confusing. All right. Before I really dive in, the last thing I'll say before I get into the weeds is that I know different agencies tend to highlight different things when they first pitch the program, and my goal typically is to hit things that are useful to people who are brand new to the program, and really specifically to focus on things that are hopeful for you to understand whether you want to take a next step in engaging with NSF, right? So I'm not going to get into the process here, the ins and outs of proposal smithing, or any of that kind of tactical stuff. I really want to talk about philosophy and fit and appropriateness with the program. Okay, so first of all, just to talk a little bit about who we are as an organization, because I think that's helpful to understand us. We are part of the federal government, so we are a pretty high-scale enterprise. So the National Science Foundation is about a $10 billion budget last year, and we have about 2.5% of that budget for SBIR. The team here at NSF has really been centralized, and so when you think about all things SBIR, what you're going to see is that the program directors here are hired really explicitly to do this one job, which is engaging with the small business community, giving them advice, bringing them in, encouraging them to apply, applying our detailed merit review process to understand which proposals are the most meritorious based on our criteria, doing diligence on each of those companies if we're going to fund them, and then after we make awards, working with those companies pretty closely to help them be successful and to keep, and honestly, to keep tabs on them. And so we have this dedicated program director on one of 14 program directors right now that run tip to tail this program. And so one thing I will tell you that I think is important to know as new folks is that all the program directors like me have relevant experience in the startup world. We're also technically trained, and so we understand some about your technology and some about the startup world. And once you understand which part of the program you fit into, the program director who leads that portfolio is really your point of contact. And so you should be able to pretty quickly figure out who the person is who you can ask questions of and who the person is who's going to make a final funding recommendation on any proposal that you submit. So it's not something that you have to map out 10 different parts of the NSF to understand how this process works. It's all kind of in one place. At the NSF, we award our awards, which I'll talk about the amount, but we award grants and cooperative agreements. This is probably too much detail about the government, but in general, when an agency funds grants, when that's the mechanism they use, what they're interested in is being flexible and really letting the small business that we're funding kind of take the lead in that relationship, right? So the idea being that a grant is for the benefit of a community and the broad community, and a contract is for the benefit of the agency, right? So at NSF, the fact that we give grants should indicate to you that we're open to what you want to do. We're trying to align ourselves behind what your company thinks is the most powerful way you can deploy your technology and have impact. The funding I'll talk about, but basically we have a phased program like everybody. We tend to have our awards at or near the congressionally mandated caps, meaning that if you go through the phase 1 and phase 2 program and receive supplemental funding, which many of our awards do, most of our awardees who go through that come out between 1.5 and 2 million in total funding. So it's significant. It's not all that most of you are going to need to raise to get where you're trying to go, but it's a great down payment. Really important piece about our program, we are uniquely focused on startups in the SBIR world. These data fluctuate year to year, but they've been relatively constant for the last 10 years. And so the median phase 1 company last year in our portfolio had 2 employees and was about 18 months old. That was the median company. 62% of the companies we funded last year were not only first-time awardees to NSF, they were first-time submitters, meaning we gave 60% of our phase 1 awards to companies submitting their first ever proposal to NSF. And so the takeaway from that for all of you is that we're not looking for people to be seasoned veteran proposal writers because, frankly, writing proposals is not necessarily a core skill of entrepreneurs. So we're not going to make you get good at that. We do want you to communicate effectively. We do want you to have done your homework, but we're not trying to catch you on some administrative rule. And so I would encourage you to, even though it's scary, the government, we're hard to deal with and hard to understand. I do think that even though we do put you through some of the same bureaucratic pieces that you'll see everywhere in the government, we really are pretty forgiving with respect to like following the rules and having the right format, things like that. So please don't be discouraged by some of those government documents that are hard to grapple with. We look at ourselves in this program primarily as investors on behalf of the American taxpayer. We're obviously not investors in the sense that we're going to actually take a seat on your board. We're not going to take a position in the equity of your company. This is non-dilutive funding. You don't pay it back, and we don't take ownership. But the way we think about this is that we're trying to fund companies that have tremendous commercial potential, but which have technologies that are so early and so unproven that the private capital markets are not going to fund them. And so the idea being we're providing R&D not just to do research and development, but to do early stage, make or break feasibility demonstration. And the goal for our program is to, again, be an early stage investment of a sort and get you to a place where you can then get into the larger capital markets, right? In most cases by venture capital, angel funding, but risk capital of some form. In general, we don't fund companies many, many times. The average company we funded over the last 10 years has gotten 1.03 phase 1 awards. So there are a few companies that get a second phase 1, but it's quite few. And getting a third or fourth award from us is very rare. So the idea here is that this is a temporary relationship between us for you to kind of de-risk the technology, build your company, build your team, get your hand around your business model a little bit. And once that phase 2 award is winding down in 3 to 4 to 5 years, to be able to find somebody who's not the NSF who can then pay the bills and move the company forward. So the headlines here on this slide are about just headlines from about the last year. These are companies funded by NSF in their early stages and things that they've been going on to do. A couple of things I want to point out that I hope that come across through these different headlines that you can read. Number one is that the kinds of stuff we fund takes a lot of money. We fund technologies that are game-breaking, disruptive technologies. They're extremely expensive. They take a lot of capital, a lot of time to develop, but they have huge impacts, right? So the amounts of the fundraising here from private equity and VCs indicate these are not quick-to-market technologies, right? The other thing is that if you go through our program and you go through phase 1 and phase 2 and you get validated by our technical and commercial experts and our program directors, those companies are quite well set up to then raise private capital down the road. So I think our program selects companies that later become investable, but also we work with you and we try to add value along the way to get you prepared to raise the next round of capital from whoever it is. And obviously there's lots of companies that don't need to raise venture capital. They can bring in other types of revenues to keep going. But our goal is to basically have you laser focused on using our funding as a temporary lifeline to prepare yourself to find the actual next stage of funding for your company. The other thing I think that comes out from these, which is a very important question people often ask at the very beginning of talking about SBIR, is that the technology areas and the topics that we fund are almost unlimited. So you can see, just looking at the headlines, we've got medical devices, we've got pharmaceuticals, we've got robotics, we've got energy, we've got nanotechnology, we've got materials, we've got autonomous vehicles. So the goal at NSF is to have topics that are basically broad enough so that everybody fits somewhere. There's a couple things we don't pay for, but they're very rare. And so if you have a technology that has huge impact potential and huge technical risk to reduce, you probably fit somewhere in our topics. This is probably the most important slide here for those of you who are new to the program. we do have a way, and I'll talk about how we actually formally process this question about who is a good fit. But for all of you to understand, the things that separate the world of millions of small businesses in the country from ones that are a great fit for us is, number one, your company has a pressing need to do high-risk R&D, right? You have hurdles, basically, that ideally that you have hurdles that are high enough that if you can't get over them, your company is going to die, honestly, to put it bluntly. And so the idea is not just, every company has hurdles where if they don't execute their business model or hire correctly, they can die. The companies that we fund specifically have something about the way their product is supposed to work that they're not sure if it's possible. And they need R&D to figure that out. And it's possible that the result of that R&D will be that the product cannot be built. And so you guys will go on and move on to whatever the next phase of your life is in that case. So we are looking for that existential technical risk where R&D is going to attack it. The upside of having a unique technology with all this risk is that, in general, if you're able to go past that hurdle that I talked about and show that your technology is feasible, that actually creates an advantage for your company, which is that you have a moat. You have an innovation, a product, or something underneath the hood of what you're building that nobody else can build. It's a new feature, a new way of doing things, a new instrument, whatever, that other companies could take it apart, put it back together, and they're not allowed to basically copy it, reverse engineer it, right? So you have this moat that the product that you have is going to be unique, and there's no way for someone else to neutralize the advantages that it creates. The other things that we really look at, and again, this is especially important, NSF is really focused on commercialization. I know you hear a lot about that at various agencies, but I got to tell you, without you commercializing your product, there's not much value for us in what your company is doing. And that's not true for every agency. Some agencies, the science that you're doing is valuable to them per se. And some agencies, they want the product you're building, even if the commercial market doesn't. For NSF, we don't get anything out of what your company is building unless you're able to find a customer whose need that you can meet and then scale that meeting of the needs up to become a vibrant company that's growing and creating value for your customer and extracting value to build the company. And so we're looking for your company to really see our funding as a temporary measure that will allow you to get to your big, hairy, audacious commercial goals. The best way you can show that you're commercially focused and serious is that coming into phase one, that you've done homework on who your market and specifically who your customer is, who needs your product and why, and who they are and how they think and where they live and why they get promoted and who else in their organization is involved, right? So really getting into a granular level of what your customer's life looks like, because that's going to be really important to understand how to build your business model. So this is customer discovery. We have the I-Core program at NSF, and there's lots of other programs that are kind of along these same lines. If you don't have the voice of customer that comes through your proposal, it creates a disadvantage for you in our review process. Some things that you should not worry about. You might worry about them a little bit, but in general, I think people tend to worry about these more than actually is necessary for NSF. Please do not apply this slide to other agencies. I really think with other agencies, you do need to sometimes worry about these things a lot. You could talk to them and ask, but for us, basically, again, fitting a topic is not a thing we worry about. NSF having some kind of specific internal interest in what you're doing is not. We try to keep our own kind of peccadillos out of that discussion. As soon as we have a point of view that can have attention with what you're trying to do, and our opinion is that we want to get behind you and push what you're doing in whatever direction you're trying to push it, rather than having you kind of be tailoring what you're doing to what we need. A lot of things you've never done before. We get a lot of first-time applicants, and they make a lot of mistakes, and most of those mistakes we can fix. And especially this goes to the budget, which is almost incomprehensible. Having been part of the startup, it's sometimes almost incomprehensible to a new entrepreneur, especially ones who come out of technical roles, let's say. Being a first-time applicant is not a big deal. We talked about that. We don't typically reject proposals for administrative issues. Out of every 100 proposals that we get, we have 98 of them proceed through the review process. 2 of them we have to return for various statutory reasons, but 98% of proposals being able to fix whatever issues they have and go through the full review process is actually quite a high number for the federal government. And then finally, we are the NSF. We do have a lot of scientific degrees flying around in our team and within our community, but you don't necessarily need to have any specific scientific pedigree to compete in this program. It is important that because we're funding you to do high-risk R&D, that your team possesses technical competence and skills that align with the work you're trying to do. But those technical skills don't necessarily have to come from having a PhD or having an academic connection. Now, in some fields, that's often where they come from, but in some fields, there's not necessarily a case where all the expertise is in academia or is in the advanced degrees, right? There's a lot of areas where the leaders in the technical fields are actually taking different paths. So show that you have technical competency and technical ability as your team, in terms of your team broadly, but don't worry about having to check a specific pedigree box. One of the things I will point out is that most of the companies we fund, and actually almost all of our big success stories, are first-time entrepreneurs, and quite a lot of them are actually early career people, right? So people who very recently, before they got their Phase 1 award, were at a university as a student or as a postdoc. That's actually the most common founder we see with the big success stories that we've charted. All right, I think I have 1 or 2 more slides here. If this all sounds potentially relevant to you, there is a first step you can take. You're welcome to reach out and ask questions, but when you're ready, we recommend you submit a project pitch. This is something that is open all the time. It's a rolling review. It's basically, we say it's 3 pages, but it's more like 1,000 words, I think, which is not quite 3 pages. What we're really trying to do with this project pitch is to get just enough information to figure out if what you're doing is a good fit for us, especially along the two axes where we see a lot of companies end up being not a good fit. And those 2 axes are their technology is just not innovative or risky enough for us, or number 2, we don't see a pressing need for them to do hundreds of thousands of dollars of R&D, right, which is what we're going to pay for in Phase 1. So the project pitch just gives us a sense of who your company is and what the innovation is, why you're special, your product is special, and what you need NSF funding to kind of prove, basically. That's the first step in our process. If you submit a project pitch, you'll either get invited or you'll get told you're not a good fit. And either way, you'll get feedback. If you're invited, then the full proposal is the second and final step in our process. That's full proposal is something that we're I haven't updated the slide today. Actually, we reopened our solicitation 2 days ago. So there is actually currently a solicitation open that goes through mid-May, and then we'll have a proper new solicitation that will be announced by the time the current mid-May window closes. And that new solicitation will cover the rest of, more or less the rest of the calendar year. So the full proposal, you have to wait for a solicitation to be open. The project pitch you can submit whenever you're ready. And the project pitch, we do turn around pretty quickly in a couple of weeks, typically. That's it. I said 20 minutes. Oh, I hit my time pretty well. I hope that was not too much or too little.
I had a question come in. Can you comment on the state and timeline of the new Phase 1 and Phase 2 solicitation, and particularly what happens to Phase 1 awardees whose submission window has ended or will end soon?
Yeah, so this has been kind of a roller coaster this year. The Phase 1 solicitation that had been released, that covered all of last year, has been extended. It's just been reopened until May 15th. So as of right now, anyone with a project pitch that's active or that was active up in any time after, I guess, March 5th could submit today and up till May 15th a new Phase 1 proposal. We're anticipating that by the time that May 15th date comes, a new Phase 1 will be out. If not, if we ever have gaps between solicitations for either Phase 1 or Phase 2, we give folks a grace period. We don't let that kill your chance to apply. And so, if you're between now and May 15th, you've got your window open. If you're after May 15th, we should have another solicitation that you can respond to, but you could always submit now. Phase 2 should be open as well by May 15th, and again, cover most of the rest of the year. Unfortunately, you know, the process for getting those out on the street is now beyond my visibility horizon until it comes out, but I've been told that those timelines are quite likely. So did that answer everything?
I think it did.
Okay.
There was another comment, basically, you know, these are the current window is only for phase 1 applications. You're not currently taking any phase 2 applications.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Question coming in. What metrics are used to determine the company is, quote, structured and staffed for aggressive commercialization if the median company has 2 people?
Yeah, this is a good question. It's a nebulous aspect here, so it's a really, really important thing to kind of elaborate on. So yeah, when you know, staffed is probably not even the word I would use now. It might change these slides, but structured is actually, I think, a really important piece, right? So the things that we look for are oftentimes, you know, there's not a long track record, right? So we don't know if the company has commercialized, if they've tried in the past and they've been able to or not. We don't have that data typically. And the people involved oftentimes haven't been in a role where they've brought startup products to market. So we don't have that typically. What we are looking for is basically a couple of things. One is that we want to see at least one person who is committed enough to the hard work of building a startup that they look like they've burned their boats, right? They basically indicate, or maybe they haven't done it yet, but they indicate if NSF is going to give me this first 12 months or 6 to 12 months of runway, that this is going to be what I do with my professional time until it's done, right? And, you know, everyone can say that, right? So you don't necessarily know that. We don't need you to swear a blood oath, but there's ways that we can see people have been operating. They've shed other jobs. They've spent nights and weekends working, or whatever, so that we get a sense that in somebody's heart in the world, this company lives, right? Somebody who's kind of doing it in their spare time but has a full-time job, you know, they may, if they really like their full-time job, the question is, are they going to leave it, right? So we want to see some skin in the game, especially for at least one founder, right? So if everyone's kind of part-time and this is their second priority, and we don't know exactly, is the company going to be changed if we make an award? Are they going to, you know, people going to leave their job? Are they going to add more commitment to the company? Those things are all things that we look at. The other thing we look at to kind of gauge this is like, what have you been doing, right? We know that R&D is expensive, and you probably haven't done a lot of R&D because you can't pay for it without help. Most of the companies we fund haven't raised capital of any significance. But going out and trying to talk to advisors, talk to customers, and talk to other entrepreneurs and figure out your business model, that's actually, it just takes your time, really. It doesn't take a lot of other capital. And so have you actually taken the time to do that work? Sometimes, many times, not being paid for it, right? Doing it on your own dime. Now, that's a good indication that you have that aggressive commercialization mindset, right? So not only is doing that work going to help you to build your understanding of customer, which is really important, but it's going to demonstrate to us that you have that commitment. So we're looking at those signs of somebody who's going to take this seriously and commit to it.
Okay, we had a quick question about where's the best place to kind of monitor your windows and everything.
Yeah.
You go to your website and just sign up to be on your distribution listserv. You'll get all that information, correct?
Yeah, that's right. You know, the website here, the Seed Fund website, anytime there's an announcement, it's typically on a banner there. But if you can also sign up there for our, we have a couple of listservs. We also have like a monthly company update if you're interested in just seeing the portfolio and what they're doing. So yeah, you can definitely sign up for that. The other thing you can typically do if you can't remember anything else is if you Google NSF SBIR, I believe our new solicitation will show up within 24 hours, pretty close to the top of that. It's possible that my own personal Google data, whatever it's collecting on me, changes the behavior, but I've heard from folks that it's pretty easy to Google a new solicitation. So if you're just looking for that, I think that often works as well. You all, I assume, are Googling that as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah.
I'm sure somebody on the team is doing that, right? It's instant.
Yeah.
Question. Does NSF accept direct to phase 2 applications?
We don't. We do not.
Right.
We'd actually have to get we'd have to get a congressional change to do that. We haven't actually sought that authority. We do we understand that some companies are in that state, but our program directors like to kind of pick on our companies a little bit to get to know them and kind of get in their space and, understand them before we make a phase 2 award, right? Making a phase 1, not having met a company or worked with them or them having any track record is a little bit scary. It would be even more scary to fund a company you've never talked to or worked with or met for $1 million. And so we're not necessarily jumping into a direct to phase 2 because we like to as phase 1 as a way to kind of get to know you and do some more diligence on you before we write the big check.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that's not convenient for everybody, but that's we're curmudgeonly and that's how we like it's our old fashioned way of working with companies. So yeah.
This you've kind of talked about around this, but I want to ask it a little bit different way. Does the size of the team play a significant role in acceptance?
I don't know. I think size can cut different ways. I wouldn't say again, we're funding small teams, right? So obviously being small is not a disadvantage. I don't think having a larger team is a disadvantage either. I think that we have two somewhat in tension things that we're looking for. One is we're looking for a team that's proven and competent to carry out a difficult R&D project, which everything else being equal, having more resources and more employees and more facilities to throw at it is better. But we're also looking to really make a huge impact and move the needle dramatically for every company we fund. And so, the more your company grows, the more money you raise, the more risk you reduce, the less important our funding is going to be. And so there is that tension. So I think, having a large team can cut both ways. But as I indicated to all of you, the current data shows that the sweet spot for us is quite small. The other thing I would say is that your team isn't just the people at your company, right? It's not just the company employees. Most of our companies at the 2 employee stage have significant partners and resources and assets that they can tap that are outside the company. And every startup really does, I think Guy Kawasaki said, you're not an entrepreneur until you get somebody to work for you for free, right? So people are able to leverage those connections and those relationships to kind of augment outside help before they're able to kind of commit to full-time hires. So if you only have a 2-person team, you should think about whether you can kind of, partner and add resources and add kind of strength in other ways.
Sure. Okay, great. Thanks. I think that answered that. And then a TABA question. So can TABA funds be included in the $1 million budget for a phase 2 application? And they didn't ask this, but how do you deal with TABA in phase 1?
Yeah, so for phase 2, TABA is essentially it is something that has to fit in the $1 million. You can opt into it. It's basically left undetermined when you apply for phase 2. We have, from working with a lot of companies, our sense is that it's often the case that just giving $50,000 to one vendor is not the perfect way to spend those funds. There's oftentimes not one vendor that can add that much value to a company. And also that companies that apply for phase 2, by the time they have to kind of get that commercialization assistance, like what they thought they wanted to do has changed. So the way we decided to do it is we make TABA kind of like a TBD later thing. You put it in your budget of phase 2, and then as you work with your program director and you identify potential vendors that might be able to qualify for TABA, you get them approved kind of on a case-by-case basis throughout the award. We think that adds the most flexibility, and we found that when you give folks that freedom, I've never had a company spend all their TABA funding in one place. They could. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you give them that freedom, they spend, some of them have spent a lot of it, say, on one thing like IP. But the idea is that it creates flexibility. So that's phase 2. So you don't have to worry about that even until the phase 2 award is made, really. In phase 1, we do a more traditional thing where we basically, we use TABA funding. We bundle it internally, and we use it for a couple of things that are parts of our programming in phase 1. We do contract with Dawnbreaker to do commercialization assistance, kind of a traditional approach to helping you prepare your phase 2 proposal. They work with you for free. And then we spend some of that money funding our Beat the Odds bootcamp. I haven't talked about it, but every phase 1 awardee goes through a miniature version of the NSF I-Core program called the bootcamp, where you work with national I-Core instructors and you go through 30 customer interviews in a curated way to start to build out and strengthen your business model. And so we let companies use some of their funding for that customer discovery, but we also pay for the NSF side of the costs through the TABA funding at phase 1.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. A couple questions here. Can a company receive NSF SBIR if they've already received venture capital?
They can. It's not that common. It depends a little bit on how much venture capital and what that means for the readiness and risk of your technology and your ability to access the private capital markets. There's some funding from some VCs at some stages that don't necessarily mean you're out of the woods in terms of high technical risk yet. But a lot of VCs don't take a lot of technical risk. And so there are some VCs where if it's, say, a $20 million round and it's a certain type of VC, the question is going to be like, if these people are ready to buy in, like, is our R&D really that critical, or is there really enough risk or enough innovation for us? Maybe there's enough innovation, but it's kind of proven out and now productized, and so it's kind of become a ho-hum piece of what you're doing. There's no hard rule about that. The other thing that we look at when a company has funding is what is the amount of funding we're going to provide relative to what they've already raised, and is it significant? So there's no hard limit there, but if you're starting to get into 8 figures of external funding, that would start to be a concern for many PDs. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So related to that somewhat, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you rarely will fund a second phase 1 at NSF.
Yeah.
What about if somebody, so that would be in the way you said it was at NSF, if you get an NSF phase 1, you rarely second NSF phase 1. Mm-hmm. What about if a company has gotten phase 1 or even phase 2 money from some other agency, EPA or DOD or whatever? How does that play into how you look at the company?
I think that there's more of that than there is us funding after we've already funded first time.
Okay.
And I think that's, it definitely is. We still go through the same exercise of trying to figure out, does that indicate less risk? Does it indicate more maturity, more ability to grow on their own? Some of those other agencies, what we see is that, the other agency maybe they weren't pushed along commercially as hard as we do, and so we see that there's a fair amount of value to add in terms of commercialization, business model support through the bootcamp and through the other things that we offer. So sometimes if the company maybe is still trying to has revisited their business plan or is pivoting their business model, then we can see value of applying another phase 1 award in that case. But obviously, if a company's gone through our exact phase 1 process before, then all the value we've added, it's not going to be as impactful because they've already seen everything we have to offer, most of it. So yeah, we see a fair number of companies who've gotten funding from other agencies. The only thing I would say is that we look at focus very carefully for companies. It's absolutely it's a killer for companies to defocus. And I'm a technical person. I'm a scientist. I like playing with new research. And a lot of us like to kind of go from one exciting research project to the next, right? But with a small company, the idea is that you've got exciting research and then you've got 6 to 8 years of grinding out your business, right? Or at least. And so, which I think is rewarding for some people, but sometimes not the technical folks who often start these companies. So if a company comes in with another award and it's dramatically different technology or market than what we're doing, we're going to ask some questions about why are you trying to do two dramatically different things with 3 people, right? Because if you look at companies that have really done well in the markets, even companies that, Google eventually or Facebook eventually get into all kinds of things. But if you look at those companies, the scale they got to before they stopped doing just one thing well was pretty significant. It's billions of dollars. And so for our companies, you can do two things, but you want to really get the first thing down. And if we don't get a sense that maybe they were doing something else before and then that didn't work, and so now they're revisiting and starting something else, that's a better situation than we're still doing this other thing. We're just going to do them both in parallel. That is a concern.
Right.
So we'd rather see a pivoting from something else, a company coming to us for a second award than company coming to us to open up a new front in parallel with what they have already been working on and continue to work on.
Yeah, focus.
Yeah.
Focus.
Yeah.
So quick question, are new project pitches being accepted during the current window, open through May 15th?
Yeah, project pitches are always accepted.
Right.
We do use the windows as a way to kind of reset your opportunity if you've been declined and you want to submit a new project pitch. And so if you did have a project pitch not invited prior to March 4th, you'd now be permitted to submit a new one.
Right. Okay. Rough percentage of proposals that are awarded phase one?
10 to 15% at phase one.
And about what percentage of the pitches are getting approved right now?
About half.
About half.
Yeah, about half. Yeah. Yeah, we've had that number's come down. We've had I think actually this is maybe Gen AI, we're not sure, but there's been an uptick in pitches and it feels like a lot of those may be AI enhanced pitches. So I don't know if that's people who feel like it's easier to put together a pitch, so they're submitting when they wouldn't have before. But like we've seen a bunch of new pitches that feel like they're not up to in the right place, and we're not, and so the numbers have come down a little bit.
Okay. So I'm going to go through these, but you just said something that's good. I want to come back to.
Yeah.
Should pitches be tailored to specific topic categories as they're listed on the site, i.e. mechanical engineering, biological, et cetera, or just put together a pitch and let you all decide?
Yeah, don't tailor it for us. Yeah, please don't. I mean, again, there's pieces of this that you have to like, the government wants it a certain way and you have to do it a certain way, but your story, what you're trying to do with your company, the customer you're trying to serve and the problem you're trying to address, like that should be, you should just give us the straight dope. Don't tweak that and tailor it or soften it for us. We want to hear the actual honest truth of what you think your company's trying to do.
Can you get feedback? So can the feedback that you get from a failed pitch be used to resubmit during the same submission window?
It's very often the case that during the review of a pitch, we'll go back and forth, sometimes multiple times, asking for information.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases, obviously, you respond to the question or the feedback that was given. If the pitch has gone to a place where it's not invited, then you'd have to submit a new pitch. Now, obviously, you could respond based on the feedback. We hope you're listening to the feedback and responding to it. But it's up to you on how much of that prior engagement you'd want to kind of explicitly explain in the new pitch and how much you just want to make it implicit.
Can any company work with multiple agencies with dedicated focus for those different projects?
Yeah, so the rules around applying to multiple agencies, there's really two important ones. One is that you tell everybody about everybody else, and every agency that you've been awarded by or you're pending a proposal before an agency, that's all included with any new agency submission, any new proposal, you talk about all that. And they're going to ask the question, so you just have to not lie, I think. The other rule is that you can't be funded for the same work by more than one source in the government. And so you could have multiple projects, even ones that push the exact same product, but the work would have to be separated in order for you to have multiple agencies, funds, multiple projects. You can submit the exact same project to two agencies, but then you couldn't get funded for both of those proposals. So those are the basic rules. But yeah, you're welcome to encourage this, as I'm sure folks gathered from the discussion I had of our topics. We overlap with everybody, basically.
Sure.
We overlap on technology. I don't think we overlap. We don't overlap in terms of the kinds of companies we fund that much with certain agencies, but we overlap. I don't know if there's a technology that I don't know if there's any technology that exists that would be relevant to another agency and not relevant to NSF. I haven't thought of that. There may be certain very specific use cases that agencies look for that we maybe not care about as much as they do, but we have funded companies where the the primary user was DoD, for example, and obviously the question sometimes is raised, like they have 100 times more money than we do. Why are we paying for their research? But again, we try to be open and flexible and support diverse groups of folks who are doing all kinds of different things. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and we see a lot of folks applying for other agencies in parallel with us.
Okay, specific question about once you get into your phase one award, you all will hold back $25,000 for the until the company submits their final report.
Right.
And then so when the company does that, to receive that last $25,000, does all the money have to have been spent before the report is submitted?
Yes. Yeah. So there's and some of it is going to be a fee. Some of the money will be profit, which I suggest you maximize. And so out of the funding that we provide, there's typically out of the phase one, it's 7%. So something like $17,000 you can claim as a fee, and you don't have to spend that. You can do whatever you want with it. So you don't actually have to spend the entire amount. But outside of that fee, yes, everything that you received should have been what we call either spent or as an account payable by your company, right? So an accountant would say it's basically earmarked for something that's already been incurred, right? Depending on how your accounting works. So there is a small cash flow hole that will happen at the end of phase one, and there's various ways we can talk about companies navigating that, but yeah, you'll have to navigate that.
Okay, great. Let's see. During the 1 year full submission window, how often can we communicate with it says grantee, but I'm guessing they're meant, you all, in other words, the agency.
I mean, there's no limitation on communicating with us. There's no blackout period, and there's no rules around that. It's really limited by our bandwidth. We process, there's 14 of us. We process 12,000 project pitches per year, 2,500 proposals. Each of us has 60 portfolio companies we're working with at any given time. So it's a very massively parallel job. And so we appreciate folks who go and try to make sure that there's not a low-hanging fruit available answer to a question before they reach out. But yeah, if you've gone to our website, gone through our documents, and maybe even attended, we have Q&As every week. Right. If you've attended all those, you've talked to people like folks at BBC who know this stuff, and nobody has an answer, then absolutely feel free to reach out. But yeah, obviously, we're not necessarily looking for you to kind of reach out just for the sake of kind of, building a relationship, right? I know that some agencies that's true, and honestly, if I've met with you, then when I'm making a decision, to some extent that can come into my decision, but we try to make it so that people are trying to kind of just chat us up. We try not to let that move the scales too much, just because I think first of all, we don't have the bandwidth for all that chatting, but second of all, again, this is a scientific merit review process we apply, and it's important to be as unbiased as possible. Right.
So a related, can you meet in person to present capabilities to your program directors?
It's pretty unlikely that we occasionally will meet with active awardees, but for people who haven't applied yet, again, the number of people who are in that capability, who are in that ability, in that class, I should say, makes it kind of unfeasible to meet with them all. Yeah, and we have to be fair, right? We don't have to treat everybody with exactly the same amount of time, but we have to be broadly fair about the amount of access we give folks. So if we let some companies come and pitch us, we'd probably have to let all of them do it, and that would be all of our time. Probably.
That's what we would do.
Yeah, it'd be fun. We love hearing what you all are talking about. It's exciting and inspiring for us, but just bandwidth-wise, it's hard to accommodate that.
So, question. I thought that any proposal that requires animal or human subject clinical research is not suitable for NSF and must be instead submitted to NIH.
So we do have a restriction on what we call clinical trials at NSF, which is, I tell folks it's not my area. I studied sciences where things don't squirm when you poke them. That's kind of the way I draw the line. So yeah, if you're in the life sciences, you'd want to kind of reach out to the program director, and even at the project pitch stage, you might discuss this. So when we talk about clinical trials, my understanding is that there's a fair amount of work that would be called preclinical, that would involve potentially animal or even human testing that is allowed. When it gets to a place where you're basically in lockstep with, say, FDA requirements, right? You're basically going through those paces. Then, and it is true that NIH is the appropriate venue for those. But I'm not an expert there, and you'd want to probably once you get a sense that what you're trying to do broadly is a good fit, maybe through the project pitch, have that conversation with your program director who invited the project pitch.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to come back to a comment that you made earlier, and that was that you sense that some of these pitches and probably proposals are being generated using ChatGPT or some of these other LLMs, large language model, generative AI tools. What's your take on that, Ben? What is how, one, do you think that helps applicants? And I'd just love to get your thoughts on it, because I get asked that a lot.
Yeah. So putting my NSF hat on, the NSF has started to require, we're not disallowing tools, but we're requiring disclosure of use of these tools through proposals. And I suspect that will happen in SBIR. It's not the case currently, but I'm guessing that will be the case soon. And part of that is just to understand what we're dealing with and how pervasive it is. And people obviously don't have to tell the truth, but to some extent, lying to the government is not a high percentage game, typically, from what I've seen, and I've testified in trials to that effect. I think honestly that it's certainly the way that Gen AI stands, and all the program directors I think believe this. You can't create innovation where there wasn't innovation. Now, you can dress it up, but a core technical approach that's innovative, Gen AI is not capable of building that. It's really, that's the skeleton, and you can put clothes on it and make the skeleton different, but if there's no bones, the thing just falls to the ground. So I think I don't think Gen AI can put one over on us in that sense and kind of make us invite a project pitch that's really doesn't have that core deep technology piece of it. I do think that it's pretty easy to detect the ones that I've seen. And again, obviously, maybe if I didn't know it was there, I wouldn't know. So how can I say that? But certainly, I think people who just try to use Gen AI and whatever it spits out gets submitted to NSF. All the program directors get a sense that they see that right away, and it's annoying to them, because it really, part of this process is for us to try to understand who you are, right? You're the most important person of the startup. You're as the founder or founders. And so now you've created this like assistant who's like your representative, who's walking into the room, so to speak. And it's obscuring the important stuff about who you are, like how you communicate this stuff, what words you use, like how your emotion comes across, even in a document. And so I think it actually just hurts folks. I don't blame people for using those things to help, but somebody who reads it and doesn't feel your personal presence in it, it's like it's not doing what it's supposed to for us, I think. And I think for deep scientific documents like the full proposal, I think Gen AI is still not able to do that piece. I think it is able to, you're probably a commercial market section, it can make it pretty. But it's a little hard to tell. One of the reasons we're trying to ask at NSF whether this is something people are using is to try to understand what it really is doing without our own personal biases in it, trying to actually get real data on it. So we're still learning about it, but I don't blame people for getting help. But I think if you're again, photoshopping a picture of yourself beyond recognition, now all of a sudden it's not helpful anymore, right? So touching up things a little bit, that's fine. There's a point beyond which it really starts to just be bad for how you come across, honestly. So
that's a great analogy of photoshopping.
Yeah, I don't blame people for doing the photoshopping. I understand that. Editing is good. I think getting help, getting people to read your proposal, I think that's all good. I'm glad for people who find tools to be able to communicate better. But there is a way to use Gen AI, and obviously when we notice it, it's a very over the top way of using it. And sometimes I assume people are doing it and I don't notice, and that's probably good. But yeah, I think it's like everything in moderation. I just would encourage, again, people to reach out to me or to our general email box, which is here on the slide, if there's any questions. And we have a lot of Q&A sessions that are on our website on the events page. If you want to drop in and just listen to people ask questions and have different program directors answer them, you could kind of drop into those and just be a fly on the wall. But yeah, I think please engage with us, and remember that, again, we're funding pretty early stage companies, so don't wait too long, right? Don't feel like you need to have everything perfect, because there's a chance that in the quest to make everything perfect, you go past our window of what we're looking for as a company. So yeah, but I appreciate the opportunity.